by the way of introduction, I just want to say that Desmond Meade is a prime driver and one of the architects of Florida's Amendment 4, the victory there to restore voting rights to returning citizens, resulted in the expansion of voting rights for 1.4 and counting, I should say, people who were convicted and formerly incarcerated. They're able to vote there in Florida. There's a major achievement, and we're so delighted to be able to talk to you about that. And you've been talking to a lot of people about your message and your good story. I love a good story. You've been on 60 Minutes, Al Jazeera, MSNBC, Fox News, testified before the United Nations regarding disenfranchisement in the United States, and voted one of the, in 2019, I believe it was, Time Magazine's one of the most influential people in the world. Also a recipient of the 2021 MacArthur grant. They also call that the MacArthur Genius Grant, isn't that right? Yes. And
that's why we will call you doctor.
Yeah, that's why we would call you. And then the Ford Foundation Global Fellow. But we're talking today, here it is, we're talking on the Wednesday before Election Day. And your role and position as the president and executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, civil rights activist and author. Mr. Desmond Meade, we thank you so much. I get tongue-tied because there's so much to talk about you. Thank you for taking the time out for us.
No, it is an honor. You know, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking in my head, this may have to be a 2 or 3 part series or something, right? Because there is just so much to really talk about. You know, one of the things I want to just tap in real quick with is that, you know, when you were saying all those things about me, one thing that you didn't mention that I think is so vital is that in 2023, my organization was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes.
You know,
yes. Talk to us about that. That's amazing.
It is. And I think, you know, when you started naming off those accolades, you know, there were so many times I was really struggling with that. You know, when I was named Time 100 or getting the Genius or Floridian of the Year and all these things, I'm like, why me? Why me? And I looked around, you know, the country, and there was just so many other people, especially formerly incarcerated people, that was doing great work in their community. And I just continued to question myself. And it wasn't until I was, you know, my organization was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize that it all came together, right? Wow. That the reason that these things were happening to me, right, wasn't because I was better than anyone else, right? But it was like God's way of confirming, or the universe's way of confirming that the work that I was doing was in line with what God had planned for me, with God, the vision that God had given me, and how, you know, even in times when it may seem like I'm just turning my wheels, or times when it's rough, right, just to keep pressing on, because, you know, I'm doing exactly what God has called me to do. And, you know, I've now learned to really embrace that, right? And know that this allows me, these things that God does, it allows me to actually spread the message even further, right? And to impact even more lives, you know, and it goes back to, I remember when I was in a drug treatment facility, I remember praying to God, and I was like, listen, the only deal I'm gonna make with you right now is that, because I don't know where you're gonna take me, I don't know what you have in store for my life, but wherever it is that you take me, right, my commitment to you is to make sure that I let folks know who got me there, right?
But you know what really struck me, well, you know, you kind of reminded me of when you were talking about that, your experience in the drug rehab center, is that there was a point in your life that you felt like you were worthless and you didn't have anything to offer. You know, reading that story, reviewing your bio, there was a time when, I guess, that dark time in your life. Can you kind of reflect on that? And I mean, because our listeners,
most definitely,
someone or know someone that may
Yep.
feel that way, but
Most
you're a
definitely.
living example of what God can do in someone's life.
Listen, there's a couple messages in that story, at least that portion of the story. But it was in August of 2005 when, I found myself standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in
Yes.
front of it. That day I was at my lowest. I was addicted to crack cocaine. I was homeless, recently released from prison, unemployed. The only thing I owned were the clothes on my back, right? And I was raised in a Christian family, right? And my mom and my dad, they were loving parents, right? And but there I was that day, right? And I at that time I'm thinking how much of a disappointment I was to my parents and to my family and to friends. And I just didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And so I stood there for quite some time waiting on that train, right? But God had other plans, and I knew that. How I knew that, and I didn't know it then, but I know it now, was because the tracks that I stood in front of was the busiest railroad tracks in Miami-Dade, Florida, right? Those tracks
Come on.
led to the port of Miami, and it was always like every 5 minutes there was a train that was coming, right? But that day when I stood there, no train came, right?
Sure.
And eventually I ended up crossing the tracks, and I walked a couple blocks further, and I checked myself into a substance abuse treatment facility, and I was able to enroll in a 4-month in-house treatment program. And after graduating from that, I moved back into a homeless shelter again. And while at the homeless shelter, I decided to do something to help myself, or to prevent myself, I should say, from recidivating or relapsing, I should say,
Mhm.
where I use drugs again. Because there have been many times in my life when I would stop using drugs and my life would improve, and then something would happen and I would start using drugs again, and my life would just spiral down, and it was just back and forth, right? And I know from folks that's listening or watching can really relate to that, about that just vicious cycle, right, of relapsing and drug addiction. The main point I want to just touch on briefly is the fact that I was raised in a Christian home, right?
Mhm.
And I know from my experience so far that there's so many people in our churches, right, that may have a son or a daughter, right, or a loved one that has battled drug addiction or maybe been incarcerated. And let me tell you what happens, right? Sometimes, right, those very same folks will start feeling self-conscious and looking around and wondering, I wonder if folks in the church think that I'm not a good Christian because my son or my daughter is out there, on drugs or incarcerated. And sometimes the shame of what our family members are doing, right, that is so detrimental, will cause us to not go to church as frequently, or sometimes even stop going to church because of that shame of wondering how people are looking at us and wondering about our level of Christianity, right?
Mhm.
But I go back to that prodigal son, a story even in the Bible, that, man, listen, when you plant that seed, that is all that you have control over, right? To plant that seed in the child, and the verse that talk about that you train a child in the way they should go, they should not depart from it. And it was, that was my experience. My parents planted some seeds in me at a young age, but it was something that I had to go through, right? Something that they had no control over, that was not even a reflection of their level of parenting, right? It was a journey that God had to take me through in order to prepare me to be of greater service to Him. And
Mm.
so, in those dark moments, in those moments of frustration, and those moments of disappointment, right, there are glimmers of hope that people could hold on to, understanding that, number one, it's not in my hands, it's in God's hands. And then number two is, if God is taking them through or her through whatever it is that they're going through at this moment, He must be preparing them for something greater, right? And so I know that my mother, if she was alive today, would be so proud of me, because I went from that person, right, in front of those tracks, to the man that I am today, right, having an impact across the world, right? Because when Time Magazine named me one of the 100 most influential people, they didn't say in the country, or in the state of Florida. What they
Mm-mm.
said was in the world.
In the
In the
world. You
world.
are
And
just,
that's the power of, that's that testimony right there.
I love this testimony because I have relatives. I don't know if Daniel does, but the experience and friends, that
We
experience of
all
being
do.
the family on the other side when your family member is out in the wind. You know, you don't know where they are. You don't know if they're in their right mind. You don't know, you haven't heard from them. And so everything, not knowing your family, everything you just said just is a balm to
Mhm.
the family who just been rubbed raw by these kinds of circumstances. I wanted to know about that time that, you know, God's hand on you and his hand in your experience. And you know, since we're here, I would love it if you would, you know, just help us talk to other people who are uh still in that cycle right now. Maybe they're incarcerated, maybe they're gonna get or see this while they're in that dark space. You know, what are you saying to them?
When I think about that message to people who are caught in the grips of incarceration or this criminal justice system, right? That we, one of the I would say the miscalculations I made early on was thinking that I could do it for someone else, right?
Mhm.
That I could change to make my mom happy. I could change to make my father or somebody else happy, right? And the reality is that the change have to come from within, and it have to be about us. That is that one time when we have to be extremely of selfish, right? And make sure that everything that we're doing is to allow us the opportunity to actually change, right? That we don't look outward. We don't look at what the world is doing. We don't look at society or the systems, the various systems that are designed to keep us down. We don't look at those systems as an excuse, and we don't look at outside and other systems or people as the reason why we should change. It has to come from something that within, and it's a personal conviction. You know, the other day I was speaking at a couple of Kirk Franklin is doing a
Sure.
tour reunion tour.
I was at that. I'm glad you're speaking on that. I saw you when he was in Orlando, and you
Yes,
came out.
yes,
You did a big voter push. I was so
yes.
happy and proud. Say, I know that guy.
And but let me tell you. So when I after I was done and I went and sat down,
Mhm.
when Yolanda Adams came out, that broke me down, and I
Mm,
cried the entire time there, right?
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
she
All right, man.
she had this song called "Open Up My Heart,"
Yes, yes. Hmm.
and that was the song that took me to that point, right? And I don't know all the words, right? But the key themes of that song is when you're alone in the room by yourself and there's no one else to turn to, it's just you there, right? That is that moment that you have the opportunity to have God be in that presence, and you can open up yourself and invite him to come in and say, I can't do it by myself anymore. I can't. I thought I had the answers. I thought I had the strength, right? I thought I had the support, but I don't. I need you to come in and take over, right?
Yeah.
And my message to anyone that's in the midst of addiction or, like I said, incarceration, is that at some point you have got to deal with yourself, and you have got to realize, right, that there is a power that is greater than you, right, that can
Mhm.
bring you through any
Yeah.
circumstances, right? And I think that's another reason why, God has allowed me to be blessed like that, because so many times we think that because we made a mistake or because we're in certain situations, that there's only so much that we can do. There's only so much improvement we can have in our lives, right?
Mm.
But God has used me as an example to
Yeah.
let you know that no matter how low you have gotten, right, he can take you to the highest of highs, right? Like, come on, in 2005, I was addicted to crack, in front of trains, homeless, and all of this, right? And here it is in 2024. Man, I could say things that the overwhelming majority of people in the world, even dignitaries in the world, can't even say. How many people you know have been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world, a genius, and nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
That's
You're the
only
first.
God.
You're the only
Only
one.
God.
Right?
The only one
You
I ever
know?
met.
Only God.
And to have that be a person that was once in front of those railroad tracks, oh, skinny as all outdoors, because oh, Jesus
You were
Lord.
out there.
So the message is the minute you can recognize that there's a power greater than you and you can open up your heart and submit yourself to put your life in his hands and let him be the guiding force, the universe is yours.
You know,
There's
that is a
nothing that you
strong,
can't accomplish.
that's a strong message today for our young, disenfranchised, feeling Black men who feel like they their voice doesn't matter. You are a living testimony that your voice matter, you matter, and you can leave a legacy. Don't you know that there's 1.4 plus million people that's carrying your legacy of what you're doing?
You know what? You shortchanged me, bro.
He said it's
There's
more.
about 6 million.
Yeah,
Come
all
on.
right.
As a
There we
matter of
go.
fact, there's about 6 million people who across the country cannot vote because of a prior felony conviction. And then there's an additional 19 million who can, but most of them don't think that they can. Right? And they think, oh, because I have a felony conviction, I'm not going to be able to have a say in this election, or society doesn't care about my voice. And they're just going through the motions of life and not even understanding that they've been freed, that they've been liberated, right? With the work that we've been doing, right? And that they can have an impact, a much greater impact than what they're having now. You know?
When we're talking to you, and I've watched several videos and read several articles about you, and I'm looking at you, this Black man who is strong and does not mind us seeing your tears, your heart, your experience. And right now, in particular, as we go into this election, well, we're already in the election season, the topic of Black men right now and voting is so critical and so central. One, are we missing some of the brothers? What are we missing in terms of bringing my people along? You have this T-shirt and a book said, "Let my people vote." What are we missing for our brothers?
You know, that's been a topic of discussion. Matter of fact, I just flew in from Pittsburgh, where I was on a panel around the same subject, around Black and brown men and voting. And you know, the thing that sticks with me most, the part that's missing, is that no one is speaking with Black men; they're speaking at Black men.
Come on.
Right? And as long as they continue to speak at Black men, they're going to get the results that they get. And not really understanding that even us as a black people, let me tell you, we are not a monolithic group, right? However, we are the only group of people where there is a unreasonable expectation that is placed on us. There is no other group of people that you can look at and automatically know how they're going to vote. There's no other group of people but African Americans. And that in itself is problematic, right?
Yeah.
And then because of that unreasonable expectations, right, that is now transferred even more on Black men. And the reality is just like even with our faith, how many different denominations do we have in our faith, right? And I mean, we countless denominations, right? And so there are so many variances of African American men, and there's so many experiences that people have yet to even touch the surface or scratch the surface on, right?
Mhm.
And you remember, I think it was Shaft. Who's the guy that sang Shaft? I cannot think of his name
Oh,
right now.
Isaac Hayes.
Yeah.
Isaac Hayes. So he's a complicated man.
Yeah.
And when you have complicated men, right, there are some nuances that you have to address. It was, especially if you're going back in the history of African Americans, in particular. Now we're talking about the black men, all right,
Mhm.
and what a black man had to endure for about 400 years in this country, right?
Mhm.
And what he had to endure after those 400 years of slavery, right?
Mhm.
And that he has to continue to endure it now. There is no other group of people that has been most targeted for extinction than black men in so many different ways, right? And
Mhm.
so there are so many different complexities and nuances and perspectives that is within the black man to actually expect now all of them to move in unison.
Yeah.
That is totally unrealistic. And
And
so
we should say that, that maybe the headlines talk about the disaffected
Mhm.
portion, but by and large, most of black men even today are engaged and are voting, and they're part of it. So it's a small segment, but that goes back to what you're
there you
saying.
go.
We're not
But
monolithic, and
Yeah.
everybody's not energized by the same thing.
yep. I
All
mean,
right.
and then we're seeing cases in which black men are actually outperforming every other group,
Yeah.
you know.
All right.
But there are these narratives, just like black men are not good fathers. And the reality is the black men are the number one
Yes.
parent in this
Mhm.
country or over any race of folks, right?
Mhm.
And so there are so many things that we do have to break down.
Mhm. Right.
And yeah, I'm thinking, I'm sure the black farmers think differently than the urban men who own a barbershop.
Most,
Right.
you know what? And here's the thing, though, right, Daniel? When you stop and think about it, right?
Mhm.
Not everybody's not going to have the same issue that's number one in their life, right?
Right.
To some, it might be economy. To some, it might be women's rights. To another, it could be criminal justice reform. It could be so many different things. And so, what moves one person to the poll is not going to necessarily move the other person to the poll. And you can't get mad if someone
Exactly.
is not embracing your issue at the same level of intensity that you're embracing it, right?
Let me ask you this on this, and don't answer if this is weird, but how did you take it when it seemed as though the current Republican candidate was attempting to use his criminal engagement and convictions as a way to connect with Black men in the Black community?
Let me tell you how I took it. I took it the exact same way as when I heard even the current, right,
Hmm.
Democratic nominee use that F word, right? When they use
Hmm.
that word felon, or
Hmm.
took it the same way like when President Biden in the first debate said
Hmm.
that word with so much venom in his voice that I
Hmm.
felt like he was talking to me, right?
Mhm.
Right. And I told folks that kind of took me back, or the scenario I would paint for you by how I feel is when you have that white friend, right,
Hmm.
that is supposedly like cool with black folks and everything, and one day you with that person and another black person pissed them off and they call that black person the N-word. Now you looking back and, whoa, where did that
Yeah.
come from? I wonder if they think that about me, right?
Hmm.
And so I actually wrote an op-ed in Time magazine about
Hmm.
that, saying that on both sides, right, you need to be a little bit more mindful of how they're using that word, because one is playing on it to get votes, and then the other one, actually, the other one is doing that too. But at the middle of it is millions upon millions of citizens in this country that are suffering, right,
Hmm.
because of that same F word, right? People are not being able to get jobs, all right? People are not able to get housing. People are not able to vote. People are made to feel as if they're less than, and their voice don't matter in our society, when that is far from the truth, right? But that's a reality that millions upon millions of people are facing. And what both sides needed to do was engage in some earnest, sincere debate or conversations around what are the changes that need to happen,
Some
right?
policy,
And they were not
policy that could
doing it.
affect
Oh,
people for the better. I
Yeah.
get you.
Yes.
I'm following you. Can I follow up with that as well? Um, you, going back to the things that inspire people or get people engaged. We talked at the top of our conversation about your Christian upbringing and Christian roots. And so now I'm looking at two different sides to this. I've seen you say very passionately that voting is sacred. And on the other hand, I've seen people who take it and run with it, and they believe there's God's party, God's agenda, or they believe that there's a spiritual duty to vote a certain way. How do you help voters, kind of balance the
Navigate.
middle? Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. It does. Last night at this event in Pittsburgh, we had a young lady approach the mic and she asked that question that, she was raised
Wow.
in a Christian family
Mhm,
and they believe in the separation of church and state,
mhm,
right? And so she asked, well, what can I say to her that would allow her to, actually now get engaged? And I think that, taking the religious practices out of the equation. I went back to Christ. How
mhm,
Christ was an activist, right?
Yes, he
He
was.
he he fought for people to listen. And I said, well, as the central part of Christ being the central part of our faith, right?
mhm,
His words are very clear, right? So
mhm.
much as you have done to the least among us, that's what you've done to me, right? And if you love me, you feed my lamb. If you love me, you feed my sheep, right? And then even in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul wrote about, the love chapter, where, at the end of the day, God is not impressed with how much tithe you give or how much you call his name or how many times you pray a day or if you can lay hands on folks and all that. He's not impressed with any of that if you can't bring yourself to love who you despise the most,
Mercy.
right?
Come on, preacher.
Those are facts, right? Those are straight facts, right? As a matter of
Yes.
fact, they say that all of that stuff is as sounding brass and tingling cymbal, right?
Mhm,
It's just nothing but a bunch of noise. And so, as a person of faith, right, what should guide you is not the religion, right? What
mhm.
should guide you is that number one thing that Christ said, right? That you love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? That about let love be that guiding force, right? Are you voting to help people less fortunate? Are you voting to help people who are being marginalized? Are you voting to help the immigrant, i.e., the story of the Good Samaritan, right?
Mhm.
Right? Are you voting right to help the people who are incarcerated or addicted to drugs, right? If you're not voting with that being your guiding force, then that's not a vote around faith, or that's a vote around some religious practice that you may have that is
Mhm.
totally out of line with
Yeah.
the teachings of the person that you claim to be following. And when we call ourselves a Christian, that means that we strive to be Christ-like, right? And he is like the best example, right? He welcomes the least among us. He welcomes the foreigner. He welcomes, right, the person. Matter of fact, as he was dying for our sins, his last conversation was with who? That
Yeah.
person that was convicted, right? And
Yes.
sentenced, right? And you know what he said, right? Hey, when that person asked God to be saved, God says, this day.
Mhm.
He didn't say, you got to show me in 3 years how you've been doing first.
No
He didn't say you got to
probation,
wait
not
a certain
parole.
amount of time. He didn't even ask him what he did, right?
Yes.
What he said was, this day ye
Mhm.
shall enter paradise. And that sits at the foundation of our
Mhm.
faith. That is interwoven in the fabric of our faith. The concept of grace, forgiveness, and redemption. And if these things are not your guiding force, if you're voting for something other than that, to where people are being marginalized, people are being murdered, people are being unhoused, right? The people are being treated like trash or being referred to as trash and animals and reprobates and all this kind of stuff. If you're subscribing to that type of approach to another human being, another one of God's children, right? Then that can't be Christ-like. That definitely can't be, you know what I'm saying, guided along the faith. And so your faith dictates that you let those things be your guidance for, and you advocate by using your voice. And there's no bigger tool to use your voice than by voting.
Wow.
Drop the mic.
Yes,
Drop
I think you
everything.
got your answer, Carmela.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Well, I just thank you so much. We could sit here all day and talk to you about, I mean, and part of me I just want to pick your brain and ask about so many different things. For example, I'm looking behind your shoulder, looking at this picture of a beautiful family, a wife and 5 children, right? Look at God. I mean, you're so blessed. And
You
I know
might
you know
need a part 3 or part 4 of this thing. Because that woman back there, that, as a matter of fact, when I met my wife, my words to her was that I recognized who she was, and that was God's gift to me. Right?
Yes.
Understand me? I did not choose my wife. What I tell folks, the second smartest thing I did was allow myself to follow God's lead, right? And He placed her in my life. And let me tell you, in Florida, I led the effort to pass an amendment to re-enfranchise 1.4 million people. Well, God took that woman who was broken, right? And it was at the depths of hell herself, right? And transformed her and put us both together, right? Matter of fact, when I proposed to my wife, I told her that God brought us together for something that was bigger than me, her, or the both of us put together. Right? And let me tell you, that woman there, right? Her work now has allowed over 15 million people across the country to have their criminal history sealed, right? In an automated fashion, so they'll be able to get jobs, housing, education, and move on with their lives, right? 15 million, And so our story is a story about Black love, the love of God, and the love of the community, all wrapped up into one, and how God could take the least among us to bring about the biggest change. And sometimes, a lot of us read the Bible every day and seem to forget that, right? They seem to forget that Moses killed somebody. They seem to forget that before his name was Paul, it was Saul, right? He was public enemy number 1. And if he was alive today, we all be screaming that he'd be buried underneath the jail, right?
Yeah.
But I'll never forget when God sent him to Ananias. Ananias said, God, you sure you sent the right man?
Did I hear that right? And David put a hit on somebody.
Does.
So yeah.
That's what he does.
Yes.
He used that little shepherd boy who couldn't even qualify to get in the army to defeat an enemy that the army was scared of. Right? That's how God gets his props, right? He don't get his props by empowering or enabling the most powerful person around or whatever. No, right? He's God because he'll take the least among us, right? To do that work. And boy, when that work is done, I'm trying to tell you.
I'm trying to tell you. Well, Desmond Meade, it's been such an honor. And I truly mean this. You talk to so many people all the time, but I hope tonight when you retire, you will remember these faces of people who are truly moved, truly inspired, and blessed to do something more. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you from all of us at Message. And Daniel, thank you for rocking with us again.
Yes, Joy Broadcasting Network.
Well, listen,
love it.
Thank you all for giving me this opportunity too. And sis, let me tell you, right?
Yes,
You're
sir.
talking about me being generous with my time. I'm just being wise with my time because we don't know when we're going to leave this earth, right? And the question is that what do you want to, if you know you had a month to live, what would you want to spend your time doing? Right. And it definitely won't be foolishness. It will be about letting the people who are close to you know how much you love them and making sure that you're doing God's work and leaving a legacy, right?
Yeah.
You want to do something of substance. And so when I agreed to come on your show, it's because I know it was a wise thing to do, because it allowed me to continue to do the work that God has called me to do.
Amen. Thank you so very much. We appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to another invitation now.
Yeah, oh no.
So we get in part 2 and 3.
Yes, yes.
You are stuck with us. You are stuck with us.
Uh-oh. They say be careful what you ask for.
Yes, thank
Dan,
you.
you better watch out now. She might try to bring me on there and get me as a co-host.
Hey. It's all good.
Okay.
All right. Well,
All right,
thank
it's been a
you
pleasure.
so very much.
No, thank you.
Desmond.
Appreciate you.